Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of a four-class series for Elul of the year 5784 at the Torah Studio, Our Torah, Ourselves. We will be exploring three different approaches to being ourself with Torah, with the Jewish textual tradition and the communities of practice that tradition comes with. Mostly it's going to be me, Lexi Kohanski. It'll be next week Rabbi Avigail Halpern, and the week after that will be our founder and director Liana Wertman, and then we'll be kind of closing it off the last week of September with just like a conversation between me and Liana about how we love Torah so much. But basically, we're three modern women who love Torah a lot in our own different ways, and we're just sharing as we're getting into Elul and the season of tshuva and repentance and returning. We're sharing some different ways that we bring ourselves to Torah and that we kind of bring Torah back to us when it kind of gets out of hand. So today, I'm excited to be sharing with you a piece of trans feminist neo-Chasidus. That's a lot of adjectives. Trans feminist neo-Chasidus from the Em Habanim on Koheles 726, Ecclesiastes, on this very on the face of it a very misogynist set of verses, but we'll see what strategies feminism combined with Hasidus have to offer us in encountering stuff like that. As I think one set of tools that we don't often see used as feminists engaging with or encountering hurtful pieces of Torah. So I think it's a cool opportunity to explore what that could look like. Basically, I came to this text that I'm going to be teaching from my time learning at Maharat last year. I was learning with Rabbanit Eliza Sperber, and we came across this text from Yevamos, one of the books of the Talmud. And you can find this source in Hebrew on page 4 and in English on page 5. I'm going to read it in Hebrew and kind of in general tonight. I'm going to be reading from Hebrew and translating somewhat freely because it's really Hasidus is the kind of thing you really just need to flow with, and it kind of just has to kind of happen in the body, I feel like. So my English will not be exactly the same as the English on the source sheet, but it'll be hopefully close enough for you to follow. But if you ever lose me, let me know. So we read this source in Yevamos 63a about a rabbi named Rav. So and when we were learning this, I kind of encountered it with no warning or real emotional preparation, but here it is. Rav hava miftar mi Rabbi Chia. So Rav was departing for Rabbi Chia. Rav is Babylonian Amora, if that means anything to you. He's one of the rabbis of the Talmud, and Rabbi Chia was his teacher, and Rav was going back home, basically. And this was Rabbi Chia's parting advice to him, or parting bracha for him, his parting blessing. Rabbi Chia says to him, Amar le, Rachmana litzach mimidi dekasha mimosa. Rabbi Chia blesses him by saying, God save you from what is worse than death. That was the bracha. And the Gemara now asks, Umi ika midi dekasha mimosa? And the Gemara is astonished. It's what? Is there something that's worse than death? What's worse than death? Nafak dak v'ashkach. So Rav was what did my teacher Rabbi Chia mean by that? So he goes into it and he's very careful and he looks into things and he finds the following verse. In the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, he finds the verse from Ecclesiastes 7. Umotse ani mar mimaves es haisha v'gomer. And he finds the verse that says, and I found that woman is more bitter than death. And then Rav is like, that's what Rabbi Chia was blessing me with. That I should be saved from what's worse than death. And what's that? It's women. I hope that my introduction to this was enough of a content warning about how much misogyny we'll be encountering in these texts. But if not, I genuinely apologize. But here we are. Rav finds this verse. It's like, women are worse than death, of course. And not only does he find it written in the Torah, it actually plays out in his life. Rav hava kam mitzara le devesu. Rav's wife was giving him a hard time. Rav's wife was making him really upset. Ki amar la avidili tlufche avdale chimse. Chimse avdale tlufche. So Rav would tell his wife, what exactly is this? Yeah. Rav would tell his wife, make me beans. And instead she would make him lentils. And he would say, make me lentils. And instead she would make him beans. And apparently this was so hard for him that he felt like it was worse than death. Wow. And actually the story goes on to like make, I think, a pretty interesting comment about how that like toxic dynamic between him and his wife affected their child. But the point that we'll be looking at today, the Em Habanim, does not focus on that. But I guess like this, I encountered this story kind of in the middle of class, and I'm like, wow, this makes me so angry. That first of all, that this is in here, without seemingly without being very critical at all of Rav. But also like, we just kind of came across it without any real discussion of it. It was kind of like, oh, well, that's just what the rabbis do, ha ha ha. And keeping in mind, this was like in a context where we were all women learning Gemara together. So it just kind of all sat with me the wrong way. Actually, I'd love to pause for a second and just hear if anyone in the room live has any reactions or questions to this text, because I think that will help frame our encounter with how the Em Habanim deals with it. Yeah, what is this like? What does reading this like bring up for you, if anything? Feel free to answer in the chat.
Like I'm gonna jump in because I don't do awkward silences.
Yeah,
so
please.
like it's just immediately othering. Like even if you were someone who didn't identify as a woman, it's just like a bit of a slap in the face is my reaction.
Totally. It's like making a joke out of women. Yeah. So that's bad. But unfortunately, we have to make it a little worse before we can make it better. So if we go back to page 1, there's actually like Koheles, Ecclesiastes, like doesn't just say that one phrase. It's like a whole little 3-verse section. And to understand like the context of what the Em Habanim is going to do here, we unfortunately have to read all 3 verses. So let's just get those downloaded. Let's get them on the table. And I hope like you'll trust me enough that we're not going to just leave it. We're not just going to leave it like that. And before we do that, Zip writes, I was interpreting it literally, as in she actually was doing that intentionally to annoy him, which I thought was funny, but also would be valid to be annoyed by. I'm probably reading it too literally, lol. I think, no, I think that's a pretty straightforward reading. And I still feel like the fact that it's like, oh, this is worse than death. How could I possibly survive? It's like, and also you can't just talk to your wife. Yeah, you do have to be dramatic sometimes, but okay. So let's get this Koheles here. So back on page 1 at the top, Umotseani marmi maves es haisha. That's what we saw. Now I find woman more bitter than death. Asher hi mitzodim v'charamim liba. She is all traps. She is all traps. Her hands are fetters, and her heart is snares. Asher hi mitzodim v'charamim liba asurim yadeya. Tov lifnei ha'elokim yamalet mimena v'choteh yilaked ba. He who is pleasing to God escapes her, and he who is displeasing is caught by her. Koheles goes on. Re'eh zeh matzasi, amra Koheles, achas la'achas linso cheshbon. See, this is what I found, said Koheles, item by item in my search for the reason of things. Asher od biksha nafshi v'lo matzasi. As for what I sought further but did not find. Adam echad me'alef matzasi. I found only one human being in 1,000. V'isha v'chol elei lo matzasi. And the one I found among so many was never a woman. Thank you for trying so hard, Koheles. But so that sounds, I think, horrible. I think that sounds horrible. But what the Em Habanim is going to do with this, I think, is I think it's like very powerful and redemptive. But it's at least, even if you don't go that far, I think it's at least like a really good example of how to engage with hurtful text really, really closely and come away from it with something at least worth spending time with and constructive rather than just destructive. I should also say the Em Habanim is also me. I wrote this, but I'm gonna speak about it as if it were someone else, because that's kind of like what the experience of writing this felt like. So the Em Habanim was born in 1995 and currently lives in Washington Heights in New York City. And she is speaking to you now. So I'm going to read from page 4. How are folks doing? Ready to get into some trans-feminist neo-Chasidus? Great, love the headlines. So I'm going to read from page 4. The way that which is just where the Hebrew is, and then I'm going to translate like as I go. But on pages 2 and 3, you'll find like an interlinear translation where there's like a phrase of Hebrew and then the phrase in English, and then the next phrase in Hebrew and the next phrase in English. That's a little bit of experimental formatting. You'll let me know how it feels for you. And just one note about the way that the text is formatted is anything in bold is a quote from Tanakh. Anything in bold is a quote from Tanakh. So that hopefully will help explain some of the ways that things get phrased here, because it's very closely referential to the text. But we'll see it. And as we go, I'll try to like name some strategies and like some moves that the Em Habanim is making here, like as part of this like rereading of a misogynist source to make it actually like really cool and feminist and exciting. Okay, so here we go. Em Habanim, Sefer Koheles. So this is the Em Habanim on the book of Ecclesiastes. Umotzei ani marmi maves esa isha. So Koheles says, and I find woman more bitter than death. And the Em Habanim comments, Ha'isha shebetochech, the woman inside you. That's where we get the name of the shiur from, the woman inside you. So right away, she's starting with just like 2 words that like totally flip this observation from Koheles on its head. He says, I find woman more bitter than death. And Em Habanim says, what that means is I find the woman inside of me more bitter than death. I think what that does is like, first of all, it's not an observation objectifying women. It's like an internal observation about something that's going on inside the speaker. And it also is like, what does that mean? What in the world is the woman inside of you? And also it's interesting to note that like Em Habanim here doesn't say the woman inside of him, not the woman inside of Koheles, the woman inside of you, the reader who's reading this. So we'll talk more about what the implications of that are. But let's get a little more. What does it mean, the woman inside of you? Ha'isha shebesochech, shehi chelek hashechina begalus, which is a part, the woman inside of you is a part, a piece of Shechina in exile. Mara min hamaves asher hi mesa, and she's bitter from the death that she's dying. Ki ein at no senes la lichyos, because you're not letting her live. That thing, that woman inside of you that is more bitter than death, is first of all an aspect of God, like a feminine, a piece of the feminine aspect of God. And she's bitter. Why is she bitter inside of you? Because she's dying. And why is she dying? Because you're not letting her live. So what is that? First of all, like, what does it mean you're not letting her live? Why is she inside of you? And why is she, like, she's dying because you're not letting her live, but what does that look like? And what does that do to her? What does it do to her that she's not allowed to live? Well, Koheles actually tells us, Asher hi mitzodim v'charamim liba. So the woman inside of you is like has a heart of traps and snares. That's what it says in the verse. Kilomar anshei ha'olam mitzayadim u'macharamim aleha mitzodim v'charamim, which is to say that the men of the world are setting traps and snares for her. Ad shehi atzma nehapeches lihyos mara v'kasha al ha'olam ki'ilu liba haisa matzod vareshes. And this is going on. She's being hunted to the point that she herself becomes bitter and hard against, like, bitter against the world, as if her heart itself were a trap and a snare. Yeah, let's get the next one. Va'asurim yadeha, and her hands. What it says in the JPS translation is, her hands are fetters, meaning like her hands are like chains. But you could also read that the following way: Ne'esrim, her hands are bound. Her hands are tied. Her hands are tied from being, and so that she can't actually do anything. Mitzayer Koheles ki'ilu ha'ishan aseres uklua besoch kela libech. Koheles is like depicting an image as if the woman is trapped and imprisoned inside the prison of your heart. So like this is already like inception levels of different from like the straightforward reading of the verse. There's like, we learn there's a woman inside your heart. She's imprisoned there because you're not letting her live, and she's bitter towards the world because the world is hunting her. Because the world is hunting her, and to the point where, like, even in your own heart, she's not able to come out and like be herself and do the things she wants to do. Like, questions about this so far?
Can we do reactions also, or you just want questions?
Give me all of it.
Yeah, what I appreciate about this so far is that, like, in Kohelet and in Yevamot, we were talking about two different people, and now we're creating it to be like an inner turmoil within one, which I think is really interesting. And I almost wonder if it's like it's critical of Kohelet, because it's saying like being hateful to this woman is ultimately what leads even her, the victim, to now be hating others. And so maybe I'm jumping in too much with a modern lens, but if you have that inner kind of turmoil, you're going to hate other people as well, like if you're not coming to terms with what's inside of you. And so I appreciate that this reading does that. Like it collapses the differences in characters and says like, when you hate other people, there's actually something going on inside of you that you need to be working on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what's happening in this text, is it's like the world hunts her, and so now she herself like is a hunter in some sense. Like they hurt her, so now she's hurt and she's like ready to hurt you. And so when Kohelet comes and like encounters her in this reading, like encounters her in himself, she's hateful and bitter towards him. I mean, I also kind of suspect that part of what's like in mind here is like also the simple reading of the verse at the same time, that it's not just an internal thing, but also like he's coming and encountering women in his time, and he actually does experience them as like upset and angry and bitter. And there's like the reading here is like adding like, why might that be? Oh, maybe because all the men hate them. They're not letting them do anything. There's like a deprival of agency there that leads to lashing out. I mean, we can certainly ask like to what degree women in the biblical era understood themselves to be deprived of agency, but for sure now, I think it makes a lot of sense to us that we would think that. But also like the internality that you were drawing out on one level is like, that's just classic Hasidus. It's like the whole Torah is actually just like the drama of the internal life. And in that sense, this is like actually classical, a classic approach to reading the text. Yeah, nice. So there's like a lot of kind of complex dynamics here. It's like the external world not being like a safe place for Shekhinah to live in. And like that is, I think, maybe like that's kind of defining what exile is in some sense. I mean, she starts by saying Chelek HaShekhinah begalus. The exiled Shekhinah is the one who's imprisoned in your heart. And if she could only leave, maybe that is redemption. We'll see some redemption language later. But there's like the external world that Shekhinah is exiled from. Then there's like, and where people are actively like keeping her out. And then there's like the self, which I think in this image like has the potential to go either way. But at the moment we're starting like the self is aligned with the world in terms of like how exilic we're being. And then inside of that, like despite everything inside of that, there's a piece of Shekhinah inside of you that like on some level wants to come out. But when you first encounter her, she's like more than resistant, she's like aggressive towards you when you come and encounter her, because the world is keeping her in exile. So there's like also like a lot of compassion for Shekhinah herself in this, which is interesting. Shall we continue? Great. So we saw before Koheles, like the straightforward reading of Koheles, the second part of the verse is, he who is pleasing to God escapes her, and he who is displeasing is caught by her. So that sounds like you better stay away from women or they'll mess up your like moral purity or whatever. But let's see what Em Habanim does with it. So therefore, it is good before God when you escape from her. But what does escape from her mean? Tov b'einei Hashem yisparach. It's good in the eyes of Hashem. Mi sheyamaleit, the one who escapes. Min hametzayadim hasonim es haisha. It's good when you escape from the hunters who hate the woman. Mimena, from her. It's good when you escape the hunters from her. What does it mean from her? Mitoch koha, from her power, from her energy. Kelomar, kasher titni la revach la'asos chafatzeha, himish tatefes imach, vases lach koach lemalet miyad soneg. That is to say, when you give her the space to do what she wants, she joins with you. to give you the power to escape from the hands of her haters. There's maybe like a confusing grammatical move here, but it's actually like another classical move in Hasidus is like this mem, from, doesn't mean like the Hasidic reading of from is not like from as in we're getting away from it, but from meaning like from the strength of this thing, it happens. It's like a very common way to like reverse a reading that we don't like is to say it's not get away from her, it's get away with like it's get away from the other people, like because of her. It's kind of the sense of it. Like using her as like the base of your actions, you can then escape what's bad about the world. And there's like a particular way that you do this. What does it mean from her? It means like you encounter this angry, trapped Shekhinah, and what do? You give her the space to do what she wants. And that's what, like, you let her out of the prison and you stop trying to control her. And at that point, she joins with you and gives you the strength you need to get away from the people who hate her, from the people who, like, had you put her in the prison in the first place, or I think even, like, we might say, like, the, like being able to kind of resist, like, the social pressures that led Shekhinah to be imprisoned in you in the first place. I mean, so far I haven't mentioned like the stuff that feels really trans about this, but it's like, yeah, there's like, it's very relatable to me. Like there's a woman trapped in my heart and like everyone wants her to stay trapped there. And like, you better not let her out or else you're gonna go like down the wrong derech and your life's gonna be really horrible. But actually, like when I just like encounter her, however difficult that encounter is, and just like show up with like an energy of like, I'm gonna listen to what you want, then like you could go so many, you could end up becoming a woman. To put it in the strongest possible sense. I mean that's not really in the text, but it's something that happened to me. And I even remember like when I first started transitioning, I remember all these moments of like, oh no, God, don't let this be true about me. Now my life's gonna be so hard. I'm gonna like lose all this access to all these things. Like I really I would rather not want this so that I don't have to go through it. But like that is part of like, we'll see in a second, but that's part of like mitoch koha, from her power. You listen to her. Because like shutting it down is just not going to be productive. Shutting it down is just keeping her in the prison. And that's not what needs to get, that's keeping her in palace. That's keeping her in exile. Oh, yeah. And then Em Habanim goes on to like describe this dynamic as and this is an example of reciprocal arousal, of arousal from below and arousal from above. So this is another great Kabbalistic concept, and another great Kabbalistic concept where basically like there's a dynamic between like humans and divine energy, and there's like a flow that's kind of constantly like going back and forth, but the flow is not always present, and when the flow gets cut off, there's like two ways to like turn the flow back on, right? There's arousal from above, where like Hashem takes the initiative, shows up, and like sends the flow down from heaven. I think like the clearest example of this maybe is like Yetzias Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, and the sending down of the plagues. That's like Hashem was like, I'm done with this. Here is some plagues. You know what I mean? But then from the other direction, there's also arousal from below that can get the process started, where like we are able to act in the absence of divine energy, in the absence of the presence, to generate that, to start that flow going ourselves, even though we're not like the source of it, maybe. You might think we're not the source of it, but we can still turn the faucet on. And that, like, I think an example of that is like the Israelites who are enslaved in Egypt shout up to Hashem, and then Hashem hears it and it's like, oh, I'd better do something. That's arousal from below. And Em Habanim here is saying this dynamic is what's happening in this, like this like reciprocal arousal is the dynamic that's happening here when you are yimalet mimen, when you're escaping with like from her power. You show up to her, and like the thing you have to do, we need arousal from below, right? We have to show up to that encounter and be willing to engage with like the difficult stuff that has like glommed onto Shekhinah and made her so angry and like unreceptive and bitter, more bitter than death. We need to be willing to work through that so that she can then wake up and bring her power to us. And that's like the energy where we can start to change the world. Where like there's like an element of this where it's like the victim, the hurt party in an encounter, like can't be the one who's expected to change first. There's like a way in which that's just not going to work. You have to like you like, and in this context, you have been imprisoning her all your life in your heart. You have to show up and acknowledge that and like do some tshuva for that. And part of that tshuva is like, okay, I'm going to finally really listen to what it is that you, Shekhinah, have to tell me, have to say. What do you want? I'm open to it. I'll do it. Let's make it happen. Okay, but then there's this last part of the original verse. He who is displeasing is caught by her. So what happens when this process goes wrong? Aval vechotah yilaked ba, but he who is displeasing is caught by her. Koheles mazhir sheyish sakana be'isarus hada. Koheles is warning us that there is a danger inherent in this arousal. Ki misherotzeh lahatira min asureha mitoch kocho velo mitoch kocha, because someone who wants to free her from her bonds, from his power and not from her power, bishvil atzmo velo bishvila, for his own sake and not for her sake. I think it's interesting that Em Habanim here switches from addressing a feminine reader to addressing a masculine reader. We can think about that. Maybe that's a little too gender essentialist. Anyway, if you're freeing her, but like for your own stuff, for what you want to get out of it, but not for her own sake, you're not interested in her freedom, you're interested in her power. Huchote, that guy is sinning. And he's gonna get caught by her, meaning it's not gonna work. He's trying to take her power, but he's going to get caught by the traps and the snares that are still in her heart. Because the sinner hasn't healed the fact that she's bitter. And that's when she's going to be more bitter than death towards him. When he shows up trying to take her power without listening to what she wants, without actually addressing the harm that is actively being caused to her by like exilic forces, keeping her from being in the world, keeping Shekhinah from manifesting. And like that's what we have in this story in Yevamos. We're coming back to it. Rachmana litzlach mimidi de kashem mimosa. Umi ikamidi kashem mimosa. Nafak dak va'ashka humotsean nimar mimaves esaisha. Rav hava kametzar le devesu bechule. And that's what it says. This is exactly what's happening in Yevamos, is this chote v'yilaked ba. The sinner being trapped by her is like Rabbi Chia blessing Rav by saying, God save you from what's worse than death, meaning women. And then Rav has this horrible relationship with his wife based on like what he understands women to be, which is traps and snares. So of course, when you think someone is like purely composed of like evil and harmful elements, you're gonna like have a bad, you're gonna treat them in such a way that brings that out in them. Like this reciprocal arousal works, we saw it working positively to lead to redemption. We can also see it working negatively to lead to exile. And like Rav and his relationship with his wife, I think is a great example of that. And actually, Em Habanim draws that out explicitly. And it seems like Rav didn't merit to see the redemption of his woman. Lo hahisha kenegdo, not the one across from him, meaning his wife. Velo hahisha belibo, and not the one that's in his heart, the woman in his heart, meaning that part of Shekhinah that he is like carrying, and I think in some sense responsible for. He's letting that part of Shekhinah be trapped inside of him here. Velo zacha kayem as pasuk, and he didn't merit to fulfill the verse. As hayisi ba'inav kimotzeis shalom. And then I became in his eyes like one who finds peace. Which is a quote from Song of Songs. First of all, very controversial for like a commentator writing in the style to accuse one of the rabbis of the Talmud of being less than meritorious. Generally, we would not see such a move, but I guess Em Habanim didn't really like see a way around it. This is a bad story, and it just like the sacred dynamic wasn't working. The arousal was going in the wrong direction. But also like this verse from Shir HaShirim, I think could be read in one of two ways, right? Either she's saying that like Rav didn't merit to have a situation where his wife was someone who like generated peace in their relationship. Like Rav's relationship with his wife was not one of being motzei shalom, was not one of finding peace. Or that like he himself is the one who's not finding peace in God's eyes, meaning the way that he's behaving here is like somehow not in line with what Hashem wants. I might even say like actively destructive to the Godhead, like at least to the Shekhinah aspect of the Godhead, right? But actually this whole like sequence in Shir HaShirim, we'll see in a little bit, is like very like reading it through this lens like really plays out pretty far, but we'll see that at the end. At this point, like Em Habanim has put her point on the table, and now she's just gonna bring you like three verses that just like sharpen the point. That like, and here's another place in Tanakh. Here's, I think they're all from Shir HaShirim. Here and Koheles. Like here's another place where like here's where you can see this happening in this context. Here's where you can see it happening in that context. Aren't I right about this? It's everywhere. I think it's kind of what's happening at the end here. So let's get some more of those examples. She says, and this is exactly what Koheles goes on to say next, meaning this dynamic of Shekhinah being trapped in your heart, in people's hearts in general, is like perfectly in line with the next thing that Koheles says. Asher od biksha nafshi v'lo matzasi adam echad me'alef matzasi v'yisha b'chol eile lo matzasi, where we saw already. Koheles says, so I kept on looking, and I didn't. And here's what I kept on looking for and didn't find. One person out of 1,000 I found, but a woman among all of them I didn't find. Remember that from 40 minutes ago? So Em Habanim says, Dafka lo matza bahem isha. Yeah, that's very precise language when Koheles says, and a woman in all of them I did not find. That's very precise. He didn't find in them woman. Shelo matza adam echad, that because he didn't find a single person. Shaha'isha sheklua belibo haisanin sumatsuya. He didn't find a single person for whom the woman who was imprisoned in that person's heart was like present and findable. Medaberes ve'osama aseha bali asure yadeha, who is speaking, where the Shekhinah inside their heart was speaking and like doing her thing without her hands being bound. Which is just like, I think it's just a little bit of fun to be like, oh, here's another like, oh, you might have thought like, I just had this really cool reading of this one verse in Kohelet, but it actually, if you look at the next verse, that one's just as bad. What are you going to do with that? And Em Habanim was like, that just proves my point, that Koheles is going around looking in people's hearts and not finding women, meaning the women are trapped there, but they're not able to be found from the outside. Which like from the perspective of trans experience is I think a little complicated. Like there's people who like have not like realized they're trans, have not like realized that they need to transition yet, and like you can't tell. And sometimes there are people you can tell. So maybe Koheles's trans radar was not so strong, if that's even what he's talking about. But regardless, like the point that like people like, instead of this being a comment about like women are dumb, which seems to be the surface level meaning of that verse, it's now a comment about like people are like going through life totally blind to the fact that there's a piece of Shekhinah trapped in them and they're not doing anything about it. How bananas is that situation? Like actually totally reversing the standpoint. Like Koheles is trying to find someone who's doing the work, and he can't find anyone. Unsurprisingly, in like whatever this was, 1000 BCE, no one's doing the work of trying to free Shekhinah. Unfortunately, seems like that was the case. Okay, and the very last thing Em Habanim says to kind of tie a bow on it, but actually it blows open a whole other probably a whole other year's worth of conversation is, and there's another like hint at this in Song of Songs, Shina Emar, as it says, set me as a seal on your heart, like the seal on your hand, because love is as strong, is as stubborn as death, as bitter as Sheol, as bitter as the underworld, is her jealousy, her, what is this exactly? Her darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. I think part of what Em Habanim is doing here is like picking up on the language of like libecha, of heart, and of kasha, of bitterness that are the same, and like saying that this verse is the same dynamic as the woman inside you is imprisoned dynamic is like, not only is she capable of like a bitterness that is worse than death, that is even stronger than death, but like now this verse is saying, under the right circumstances, when you set her as a seal on your heart instead of her being sealed in your heart, then she has the capacity not just to be worse than death and bitterness, but also to love more strongly than death. And like that's how powerful she is. And you get to choose, are you imprisoning her? Are you imprisoning Shekhinah in your heart? And she's going to be more bitter than death? Or are you setting her as a seal on your heart, and then she's going to love you more strongly than death? Which is like a huge amount of like liberatory potential. I think it's like Shekhinah is just this powerful, and you're going to have to live with that power one way or another. She's in your heart. That just seems to be the human condition. She's there. But well, given that she's there inside of you, that every person has like some aspect of, I guess you'd say some aspect of femininity or some aspect of the divine feminine inside of you. That's just the way people are. regardless of what your gender is, I feel like is kind of what she's saying here. Everybody has some of both. But here she's focusing on the ways in which we have femininity inside of us. Like that is an amount of power. Femininity is an amount of power that is more powerful than death. And either you're going to use it in a way that makes things worse than death, or you're going to use it in a way that makes things able to overcome death through love I think in some kind of way. There's like a lot more to be said about like the context of the Shir HaShirim verses that Em Habanim brings, like the first one and the last one, and like the whole sandwich of it is really like, I wish she said more about it in here because it's really bananas to play out. But I've been talking for a while and my voice is a little tired. So we just threw like a lot of big ideas on the table, and like got to look at like, I think there's nothing explicitly trans about this text, but like, I can't like, coming from a place of transness, I think is like clear, if you know, kind of thing. You know what I mean? And like, now totally like, when you read the words like, ani mar mimaves es isha, and I find the woman more bitter than death, suddenly that's like a huge call to action. A huge call to action, like, oh, you found the woman and she's more bitter than death. What are you going to do about it? So I'll pause there and like open it up. Like, do people have questions about any of this? Are there questions, reflections? I'd love to like hear and hear what y'all are sitting with, and also take a look at the chat in a minute. Yeah, Sophia.
I have a kind of meta question.
Oh, I was talking for so long that my speaker turned off.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I have a kind of meta question for you.
Okay, I can hear you. Great.
Okay, great. The meta question is like I really appreciated this text and your reading. And like I think you mentioned like a few times like maybe this is what Koheles intended or not. Like, what do you think, I guess, about like authorial intent when it comes to something like this? Like, do you think that that's a necessary thing? Like, okay, Koheles like is not in 2024, is not aware of like transness the way we do, or what we're aware of it. And like, I do think it's like authentic and beautiful for us to be reading it now. But like, what do you think is like, I don't know. I mean, maybe theologically happening is like kind of intense, but like, what do you make of like this as an exercise? Like, is this like just what it means to be a part of like the Jewish tradition? We like always interpret things in like all kinds of ways. There's something like especially powerful, I guess, about doing it now. I'm curious like what your like thoughts and reactions are to like that as like this as like as an enterprise. Like, just seems really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's
a big question.
There is like what?
It's a big question, so.
Oh yeah, but I have an answer. I think there's something, I think to me, like this way of engaging with the text is like part of the genre of sacred text. Like, not that like our texts are like, maybe this is kind of controversial. I'll say it this way. I think our texts, like these books, can be like legitimately engaged with through other lenses other than like, this is sacred and contains the true meaning of life in it. If only I can find it. Like, you know what I mean? There's like historic, there's like academic ways, there's more like legalistic ways even of relating to these things. But like, if you're coming to a text like from the perspective of like a chassid, right? I think then that means like that whatever this text signifies, even if it signifies multivocally, it signifies that truth or that set of truths forever and always has and always will. And like the truth that is there that we're seeing in this moment, like there's more than one truth there for sure. But the truth that we're seeing in this moment, like actually is what the text means. You know what I mean? And it's actually there, and like in some way it's always been there, we just couldn't see it. I think you would say like the truth was imprisoned in the text till we were able to draw it out. Yeah. Did that
Yeah, that's beautiful.
cover it?
That's very nice. Thank you.
And it's like, that's really part of like how I love these things, is like, because then it's like, to me at least, I'm like, yeah, this is what it means. It doesn't actually mean the like horrible misogynist thing. Like on some level it does mean that, right? I'm not like denying what it has meant or like what it can mean to some people who read it some kind of way. But it's like, actually, like, the way that this can be a sacred text to me is when it means something that's true in this way. So it's part of like sustaining my relationship with loving Torah, since that's the topic our Torah ourselves, that like being able to like read things like this is part of like what makes this not just like a relationship with a set of texts that is like external to me, but actually this is a set of texts that was written like as a love letter from God to me personally, you know, in the way that it's that way for, I think it can be that way for all Jews, you know.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yaakov, I'm just reading what you wrote in the chat. Maybe due to his own broken fragment, Koheles could never gain an audience to a well-tended fragment. A seal on a heart, even a seal on a heart, a fragment well-tended, might react to the state of the fragment trapped within Koheles protectively and angrily. A well-tended person is able to well-tend their Torah. Yeah. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I feel especially that the part where the text is sort of alluding to the fragment within Kohelet is, it just totally changed how I was thinking about this text, and just thinking like someone carrying around an untended fragment of the divine, like what would be even a healthy, well-tended fragment of the divine's reaction to that? Like would be protective, right? Like, and so of course they could search through thousands of people and not get to interact with or like encounter like a seal on a heart, like sort of experience of Shekhinah. And when you were explaining, and when you were talking about Torah, I was like, I feel like, I don't know, I could think about Torah that way too, as a text that can have things that appear to be traps and snares. But if I am well tended and able to like show up for all the ways of looking at Torah, and I'm able to see Torah through all of the lenses that are available to look at Torah, including current ones, including radical ones, including like also not throwing out the other ones, then that's perhaps a way of accessing like that version of Torah to accessing.
Yeah, there's like,
I'm drawing parallels that are like, I really like thinking about both relationship to other people. Like if you bring brokenness and you bring untended self into a relationship with another person, they're going to bring defensiveness, whether they carry around defensive angriness all the time or not.
Yeah, totally. And
I think a certain way that we approach Torah results in a certain part of Torah looking back at us.
Yeah,
and
it's a
a
genuine
certain part of
relationship.
Torah being the one we look at the most, and other parts being inaccessible because we're looking in a certain way.
Right. And like I think part of the work is like the whole Torah is ours, is each of ours. And like, how do we have the whole Torah? And I'm definitely not there yet, but yeah, thank you for the language of like a well-tended person. That's really appreciating that. I guess while folks are thinking of something, I'll just throw out like, I think like how I wanted this class to kind of like not just be like, here's a cool, sexy idea, but also like, here's like a way of encountering a text. Bye, Leia. Thanks so much for coming. Like here's a way of encountering a text, and it's like I can imagine you like, you like read this and you're like, whoa, that's awesome, but I could never do that. Like that might be a feeling that one could possibly have. And I just wanted to name like one really significant move that Em Habanim is making here that is like makeable by anyone, I think, once you're aware of it, is like reading words with capital letters, like deciding that a word has a capital letter in front of it. You know what I mean? Like in the in the JPS translation, it just says, now I find woman more bitter than death, meaning like women in general. But in the Em Habanim translation, actually, this is a mistake. It should be, now I find the woman, capital W, more bitter than death. And now it's like, now we're in a world of like cosmological, like divine energies that are symbolized by the word woman, rather than like literal women in front of us. And like that, like just make that word, just capitalize that word, and suddenly it's a symbol that refers to just like a state of being in the universe or something that happens to be true, or like whatever. You can always like in Torah, because there are no capital letters, you can always just decide that and then see what happens when you do it. You know what I mean? So I just want to explicitly offer us all that very important tool that Chasidus and not just Chasidus, but like Kabbalah more broadly offers us. So yeah, any other thoughts or questions from anyone before we wrap up?
I'm just thinking about Rob's teacher was
Yeah.
having Rabbi Chia, like one is that like imagining that is the blessing that he was giving was like in relationship to this verse. No, and like almost imagining that like this is how he saw the verse, like that he meant it this way, right? Where he like, why would he bless his student Rav, one of the most important people that we talk about, right? Like someone who clearly was like so well founded. He's giving him one blessing before he goes, and he says this. Like, why would it be about like wanting to like see people as less, and not about, hey, while you're out there stuck in your head, make sure that you're connected to Shekhinah and to your heart. And like it, and in that he like, because it's such, like if it's a blessing, right, he takes it as a curse and makes it a curse on himself by like refusing to do it at all.
Oh, that's beautiful. There's like, and you see that dynamic again, like you treat something as a curse, so it curses you. Yeah, that's, I didn't even think of like, but Rebbe Chia could have known this. It's awesome. Thank you for that. Well, that's all I got for tonight. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for watching if you're watching on the recording. And next week, Rabbi Abigail Halpern will be teaching the next thing in the series, Can the Torah Love Us Back? So I had one answer for that. I think Rabbi Abigail's answer will be very different. So come for that next week and for the whole series. Thanks for joining us at the Torah Studio.